嗨，小红书的朋友们，大家好！今天我和静怡呢，给大家分享两个 MMI 的 question，然后我们的 sample response，然后希望对大家就是在准备 MMI 有一些帮助和启发。
Recently, the Prime Minister of Canada raised the issue of a deterrent fee, a small charge, say $10, which everyone who initiates a visit to a healthcare professional would have to pay at the first contact as a way to control healthcare costs. The assumption is that this will deter people from visiting their doctor for unnecessary reasons. Consider the broad implications of this policy for health and healthcare costs. For example, do you think the approach will save healthcare costs? At what expense? Take a few moments to reflect on this question and think about how you would approach it. And then we'll get to our own discussion on our thoughts and how we were going to approach this kind of question. 大家可以稍微读一下这个问题，然后我们之后会讲到就是我们对于这个问题的解答。
所以这个第一个问题呢是一个 policy type of question。所以 my personal tip for policy type of question is very easy. The template is not complicated at all. So you start by kind of showing a little bit awareness of your awareness on this issue, right? There's surely some conflicting information. There are some conflicts, debates on it. That's why it's being presented in the MMI format. Showing a little bit whether it's like news, personal experience, or some books you've read, just kind of introducing and set the stage. And then what we need to do next is to introduce the pros and the cons. Whenever there's a policy or debatable questions, you always want to present both sides before you present your final stance or your final view on the matter. So for me, I would talk about the pros and the cons, and then I'll give, considering the pros and cons, I think my general consensus on the topic is agree or disagree. And what I like to do to conclude is to say, is there anything I can propose alternative solution or anything modify the current policy to make it more acceptable for the wider public? So this could you can either do it whether you agree or disagree with the policy, just to make the policy a little bit better. So here you're like, again, taking the advantage and opportunity to insert a little bit more critical thinking in your answer.
So this question is a typical, does the cost outweigh the benefit kind of analysis? So the way you analyze this, as Lila said, is with the structure. What I would also encourage is to think about all the different actors in this situation. So what if this policy was implemented? Who is going to take the hit? In this kind of cost, i.e., you have to pay to have access to healthcare with the aims of deterring you from accessing healthcare. Who is the main person that you think is going to get hit the most? To me, it's going to be the patients, and most likely the patients who cannot pay. There's a lot of people currently in our economy who don't have jobs, can't put food on the table. They're either refugees or they're part of the homeless community. And these people are the people who we need to care about and who needs access to healthcare. So my personal take is I would go into analysis of all of the different community members who would be influenced. As I said, a lot of people don't want to pay this cost. And on the flip side, we have to think about, so who is this not going to impact? And my response is the people who don't have to worry about $10. And to be honest, the people who don't have to worry about $10, they're probably on the more healthier spectrum of the population because they have more access to resources. That looks like better housing, better food, and they could probably afford to use that $10 or get it from somewhere else, right? So that doesn't really deter them. So at the end of the day, I think it's really maximizing the disparity that's already existent in our current society and in essence, really hurting those people who we should care about the most.
And I think another point, like a very good point in mentioning that a very good way to come up with arguments quickly in a policy type of question to think about the parties involved, right? Jeannie brought up a really good point in terms of patients. And within the group of patients, there are different categories of group of patients depending on their social status, their financial ability, yada, yada, yada. But on the other side, you can also think about physicians and the healthcare institutions in general, right? There's going to be harms and benefits to the physicians as well. Short term, this could alleviate a lot of the wait time and like stress overload by the emergency docs or family docs, right? But in the long term, this may actually not pan out very well because think about the patients Jeannie was talking about in terms of they couldn't afford going to the clinic, right? this come into play with the terminology of preventative medicine versus interventional medicine. If these patients, they don't go in because their blood pressure is high, they need to have blood pressure medication to control them in a regular family doctor visit, then what the next thing you know is they may have a heart attack, or they may have a cardiovascular event that they have to get pulled from through into hospital through an ambulance, and that can be a greater cost, infer greater cost on the healthcare institutions, and also greater stress and workload for the physicians working there. So, short term, it could potentially alleviate a lot of the problems in our healthcare, but also long term wise is not the most feasible. And that ties in really well with an argument you can always consider whenever you are faced with a policy question is, does this policy solve the root of the problem? Because here, what is the root of the problem is, firstly, we don't have enough family physicians. We don't have enough appointments for people to get to their visit on time. Second thing is, perhaps people don't have a adequate knowledge of medicine. Like, they don't know where is the right place to reach out for this sort of inquiries, and what constitutes as an emergency. Does my kid has a fever constitutes as an emergency to go to the emergency department, or can I wait a little bit and then get a family doctor visit? Or does my heartburn constitute a visit to emerge, right? All of these things people have question about, and I don't think that's anything wrong with them necessarily. It just we have lots of misinformation on the internet. We don't have nearly enough credible resources online for people to educate themselves about. And I think the root of the problem really is just family doctor crisis, and also knowledge dissemination in a more easily disseminated, like easily understandable way.
Yeah, I really like the principle you brought there, and that is raising awareness about your own health and having that personalized understanding so you can make the right informed decisions. And I think that's something we could definitely intervene in our society with the advent of a lot of social media, news agencies. We could really disseminate that information out there so people can understand their condition and not go to the ER to do that 6-hour wait. And I think that that's an easier solution, and the people that it will harm is significantly less than like the deterrence to the more marginalized populations. Of course, it's like for these questions, you got to play the devil's advocate, right? So you got to analyze both sides. So like, what would you say on the other side? Why would this deterrence be a good thing for the government to implement in policy?
I guess for me, like I'm kind of mentioned in terms of physicians, right? If there's less wait time because less people show up, then it's easier for them to get to, clear the wait list faster. And then maybe perhaps if, let's say I have a cough and then I was about to go to Emerge, but then I think about the $10 fee, I was like, maybe I'll wait. And perhaps that actually may work in favor of the physician getting to actually get their hands on the emergency cases, right? Like the actual life-threatening cases, as opposed to going through like a several of the non-emergency cases that can actually save someone's life. Like recently, there's so many news about people dying in an emergency before they get seen, which is really sad and tragic. And perhaps in whatever way, it can play out in a way that this can be prevented in the short term. I guess for the patients as well, maybe they will feel they're able to get to line faster. Like if they paid a $10 fee, they may be able to wait less in line, like instead of 6 hours, maybe an hour. So maybe the patient satisfaction on that side, if they ever seek care, may be better. What else do you think maybe at play here?
That makes sense. Well, although I principally don't agree with the premise of that question, because it treats patients almost like as burdens to like deter them from accessing something that they have the right to access. I think on the note of efficiency, as Le has mentioned, it's if it can prevent people from showing up to the Emerge the first thing that they have a certain health condition, it could speed up the turnover a lot and allow physicians to get to the patients who truly need acute intervention. So that would look like your myocardial infarction, heart attacks, that would look like your broken limbs, broken foot, that would look like your frostbite. Those people, obviously, no amount of $10, if you could afford to pay it, would push you away. So maybe it's going to cause this filtering process so we can spend our healthcare resources on those who need it the most. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's devil's advocate at that
Yeah.
point.
I mean, also, there's always a way, at the end of your conclusion, you say, I disagree with this, but perhaps you can propose some alternative solutions or improvement on the existing policy, right? Like we discussed before, like finding the root of the problem, solving the family physician crisis, solving the kind of providing more educations to the people perhaps at emergency departments or at the family doctor's clinic. But you can also think about how can I improve the existing policy to make it more acceptable. Perhaps you want to set in some financial aid programs for people who, or exemptions for people who are below certain like financial threshold. So that way it can kind of solve the problem of like the healthcare inequity aspect. That could be something you discuss as well.
Yeah, for sure. Now, I know in a previous video we mentioned like a few tips, and my tip was to include a personal story. So I would like to challenge you and think about what has been a time that you had to go to Emerge. And would you be okay if you had to pay $10 to wait there for 6 hours? Why? What would you feel at that moment? And incorporate that story into your own answer. For me, I think I would mention maybe taking my little brother to the Emerge because he was having tummy aches. At that time, I was like, maybe he has an infection, maybe he ate something bad, and that's why he needs to go to the ER for children's. And would I be okay with paying the $10? Yes, because I think my brother's health and well-being is worth more than the $10 and the 6 hours of wait I had to spend with him. So for me, that cost versus benefit analysis wouldn't deter me. But I'd imagine that for a lot of the patients that I've cared for on the nursing unit, those who are unhoused, those who are on social assistance plans, those who are literally brought into the hospital by an ambulance because someone else found them lying on the floor or someone else found them on the streets, those patients, are they willing to pay the $10, and what if they're charged afterwards for the $10? How would that influence their life? I think it's vastly unfair for us to ask them to need to pay, and it's vastly unjust for us to deter patients.
Yeah. And I would say there also come into play of the humane parts of things, right? This policy to me is very inhumane in the way that, yes, as medical professionals, we know what is a really entails an emergency, what really entails is something that can wait, right? But for just average civilians, right, you don't have nearly enough medical knowledge, and there's always the part of elements of fear, right? Like what if I waited on this and something have gone bad? Like there is always that consequence and always that fear out of not having enough medical knowledge, which is normal because you're not a medical professional. How would you know so in depth of every single illness complaints you may have? And so kind of having this kind of deterrence fee almost plays kind of inhumanely into like, oh, you don't know this, well, too bad for you, gotta pay, right? So there's always that kind of elements of humanity kind of being lost with policies like this.
And I think that represents a shift in our healthcare system where instead of us serving patients and communities, we're moving towards a business model where we're maximizing the amount of outputs at the expense of minimizing the amount of costs. And to me, my own values speaks that I want to be there to serve, not to benefit. But of course, I understand like the policymaker side and maybe the hospital admin side might be more driven by
profit.
Profit, money, because it's quite a real problem for us to solve right now.
Yeah. So hopefully, our insights give you some additional thoughts on how you have answered the question. Feel free to leave your comments on how you think about the question. What are some additional, points you would like to make, or any question you may have for the MMI format in general. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.